Welcome back to the Damage Report. I am Rayyvana, filling in for John Idarola, who I know you all miss so dearly. And you're always saying that in the comments. He'll be back soon, but you got to give him time to spend with his brand new addition to his family, which is so sweet. And we're so happy for him. We've got a lot of super fun stories coming up. We're going to talk about the ever increasing circus that is the speakership amongst the Republican Party, the battle going on there. We're going to talk about the really sad state of affairs in Texas as an 18-year-old student is being sent to a disciplinary school because of his dreadlocks, violating the Crown Act that was recently passed in the state. We're going to talk about calls for George Santos to be expelled from Congress, as well as Kari Lake officially launching her Senate campaign. All this and more. And joining me to discuss all this is Jackson White. And Jackson, I feel like, and especially the Damage Report audience will love this, you are a massive nerd. Huge nerd.
Massive. I'm a little bit of everything, yes. And what were we saying?
I was just saying, you were just telling me you stayed up almost all night watching The Mandalorian.
Yeah, I pretty much didn't go to sleep at all. I was up till about approximately 4:30 getting through 7 episodes of The Mandalorian. I had yet to see it. And sometimes it's cool when you come to a production late because you can just binge watch it. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to wait. You can just do it. But we're lucky it's Thursday. Otherwise, but I feel good, man. I'm not going to complain. It was awesome.
Nice. And although there's a lot of people who aren't feeling good right now, and those are members of the House Republican caucus. So let's jump right in to this first story. The GOP has selected a speaker, kind of. We'll see. There's a lot of infighting following the closed-door conference vote that Scalise ultimately prevailed in. And I want to be extra clear here. This was just a vote amongst Republican members of the House. This did not make him speaker. It simply made him their nominee to be speaker. And let's get into a little bit more of the facts on this from the New York Times. Republicans voted behind closed doors, 113 to 99. Very close there, not exactly a raging endorsement of Steve Scalise, to name Mr. Scalise their second ranking leader as his successor, him being Kevin McCarthy. Mr. Scalise turned back a challenge by Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee and a favorite of the hard right, who had the endorsement of former President Donald J. Trump. It continues on. After his slender loss, Mr. Jordan met with Mr. Scalise privately and offered to nominate him on the House floor, according to a spokesman, but he made no public statement of endorsement, and his supporters did not appear swayed. So he still has to win a majority on the House floor. And just as a reminder, it took Kevin McCarthy 15 rounds to finally get the gavel. So he received 113 votes in the closed door meeting amongst just Republican members. He won't receive any votes from the Democrat members. As we know, it's very unlikely. And he is rapidly losing support amongst members of his own party, even amongst members who voted for him over Jim Jordan. Reminder, it takes 217 votes to become speaker, which means it takes only 8 Republicans in the House to prevent someone from becoming speaker. And it's looking like a lot more than 8 right now. It's looking like a hell of a lot more than 8 that are not going to vote for Steve Scalise. Now, this all took place yesterday. They are set to reconvene today, although there are no votes scheduled for today. It's very unlikely given the amount of meetings, individual meetings he's going to have to make with members of the caucus to try to sway them to vote for him, that they will be holding this today. Very unlikely. But a little bit more on the timeline. Mr. Scalise toiled Wednesday evening to try to win over his detractors, meeting one-on-one with several of them, but he appeared to be losing votes rather than gaining them. Representative Chip Roy, I'm sorry, it's such a ridiculous name that I laugh every time I read it. Representative Chip Roy, who engineered what he called a power-sharing agreement with Mr. McCarthy during his excruciatingly drawn-out election in January, pledged not to vote for Mr. Scalise. So Steve Scalise is going to be facing the same issue as Kevin McCarthy, maybe even to a greater extent, as members of his party are vocally pledging not to support him. Mr. Roy said afterward he wanted to see Mr. Scalise commit to changes demanded by hardline conservatives to how Congress operates. So Let's talk about Steve Scalise, who once described himself as David Duke without the baggage, because I think his relationship to and his proximity with the establishment of the Republican Party has allowed him to frame himself as the more moderate candidate, juxtaposed with Jim Jordan. There is no ideological difference that separates the two of them. They are both just as racist, just as homophobic. Their hearts are just as full of bigotry, and their policy ideas are damn near identical. But it's just the rhetoric that surrounds them and the proximity, as I mentioned, to the establishment, to leadership within the party, that is the difference there. Now, about Scalise. Scalise has a history of being a staunch conservative who supports cutting government spending and implementing strict immigration policies, and has long been a supporter of former President Donald Trump, though he is generally not considered a hard right firebrand like more recent prominent Republican additions to the House. Now, let's get into this a little bit, Jackson, because as I mentioned, Steve Scalise self-described as David Duke without the baggage. Obviously, for anyone who is unfamiliar, David Duke, former leader of the Ku Klux Klan. And we'll get a little bit more into his Steve Scalise's proximity to white nationalism and how Republicans are using that to oppose him in a minute. But let's just talk about what this means for maybe the Republicans in swing districts who are going to face tough re-elections. They don't want to be represented by David Duke without the baggage, or Jim Jordan, who pretends he doesn't see sexual abuse happening at Ohio State, right? This is a lose-lose for them no matter who won. And Steve Scalise prevailing, definitely it doesn't benefit any of them.
Right, exactly. He's just the more graceful, more smooth, more player version of David Duke that, can just do a little better with more audience. But of course, that isn't true, as you pointed out. And, I think it's important to remember, especially in special elections, Democrats have been outperforming in the poll than what they've shown in the polls. There was no red wave. The Republicans narrowly took the House back, but they were supposed to sweep everything and they didn't. Donald Trump is looking more and more like a buffoon. He has almost 100 federal indictments. And actually, America's response to the conflict in Israel is making the Biden, no matter how you feel about it, it's strengthening the Biden administration's look, because Republicans are very in favor of Israel, as are Democrats. But basically, kind of when you look at the whole thing in a sum, it was ironic to see Newt Gingrich recently on Fox saying, that these 8 Republicans feel that they're more important than 96% of the Republican body. But so much of this was set in motion by Newt Gingrich himself. The culture that he created of owning the libs, of sticking it to the left, a lot of that was perpetrated by him. And so we're kind of looking at the death of what not just him, but that whole generation of Republicans created. I don't, that's not to say that we're just going to get our acts together right away. But again, Republicans support Israel. Look at what Joe Biden is coming out in support of it. That is more and more, it's just looking good for the Democrats. And it's like, the more I think about it, again, the bottom line is the Republican Party is collapsing. They just are.
Absolutely. And right now, what those Republicans in swing districts that went for Biden, that are facing these tough re-elections coming up in 2024 have to contend with is the fact that the longer this process is drawn out, the worse the Republican Party is going to look, yes. The worse it's going to reflect on them, the more cohesive the Democratic Party is going to look, because for better, for worse, they have their ducks in a row. They've been in lockstep throughout this entire process. When it came to the budget resolution, the continuing resolution would pass, when it came to the first round of voting, when it was Kevin McCarthy, when it came to ousting Kevin McCarthy, they've been put together, again, for better, for worse. They've done a lot of things I disagree with, but the Republican Party has been in absolute disarray, which is going to reflect so poorly. Of course, it's not going to reflect poorly on Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's in like an R+75 district. It's going to look bad on the New York Republicans, who are facing really the most vulnerable Republicans in their caucus, are facing extremely tough battles from Democrats in this upcoming election. But I mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene, so let's talk about her for a second, because she's one of the Republicans who has sworn that she will not support Steve Scalise. Is it because he's a racist? No, of course not. She loves that about him. It's because he has cancer. Here's what she had to say. I just voted for Jim Jordan for Speaker on a private ballot in conference, and I will be voting for Jim Jordan on the House floor. I like Steve Scalise, and I like him so much that I want to see him defeat cancer more than sacrifice his health in the most difficult position in Congress. I lost my father to cancer, and it's a very serious battle. We need a speaker who is able to put their full efforts into defeating the communist Democrats and save America. We must stop funding foreign wars, Ukraine. We must stop the weaponized government and hold them accountable. We must secure our borders. We must protect our kids, 14 words there from Marjorie Taylor Greene. And we need a full leadership team dedicated to this fight and these unprecedented times, which is so I hate Steve Scalise with my entire heart. He's an awful individual, and I've hated to watch him ascend to the level of prominence and power he has already. I would hate to see him be Speaker of the House. The idea that she doesn't support him because he has cancer is patently absurd. He does have a rare type of cancer, but the prospects are very positive, and he will most likely make a very full recovery. Using that as an attack on him is shocking, but let's just get into it. There's a headline. I mentioned that he has blood cancer. Here it says, Steve Scalise says his cancer has dropped drastically and he's undergoing aggressive chemotherapy. As I said, it's expected that he will make a full recovery. Obviously, there's a joke to be made here about, I think she referred to them as hippo rights on multiple occasions. But obviously, Jackson, we both know that this isn't why she's not supporting him, right? I mean, she's been cozy with Jim Jordan since she got to Congress. It has nothing to do with the cancer and everything to do with the ally that she's made. She wants the ally she's made to have cancer. She cozied up to Kevin McCarthy, had an ally in him. She doesn't have that same relationship with Steve Scalise. That's it.
Yeah, and she could have just said that too. You know what I mean? Right. Like that would have been a perfectly fine explanation. Like, well, I've been with Jim Jordan. I've supported him for a while, and I'm going to continue to stick by him because we have a vision and we think it. But, you know, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene. So rationality, you know, doesn't really exist there. And, you know, while it may be a little bit surprising that she would use that as an attack against him, she also was, you know, just like putting on a whole, you know, with the Hunter Biden pictures in Congress, like, hey, everybody, look at these, you know, I don't know if I can say it, whatever. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I don't know if it'll mess up with the advertising, but y'all know what happened. So, I mean, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene. But like you pointed out, you know, what's her name? Kevin McCarthy took him 15 times. And it's looking like they should have just stuck with him. He was their best guy. He was the least, I would say, outwardly nuts, outwardly crazy. At least he was composed. He has a, you know, reputation of being spineless, but now look at him.
Right. How is this better than having, for the Republicans, than having a spineless Speaker of the House? It obviously isn't, especially when they haven't even been able to coalesce around Steve Scalise. And before we continue, because I've got a little bit more on the Republicans who are opposing him, but I want to ask you your thoughts on whether or not there is a path back for Kevin McCarthy to the speakership. Obviously, he announced he wasn't going to run again. But there are a lot of individuals who supported him who aren't supporting Steve Scalise. Of course, we know that Scalise is currently the House Majority Leader, second highest position of the Republican caucus in the House. But him and Kevin McCarthy have a very fraught relationship. So a lot of the members of the Republican caucus who backed Kevin McCarthy, which, reminder, is a majority of them. It was only 8 who didn't. Matt Gaetz plus the 7 that he brought with him. Is there a path back for Kevin McCarthy? Because these people who won't support Steve Scalise probably would support Kevin McCarthy. I think it's interesting. I want to know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think I read somewhere that that Kevin McCarthy's like, well, I may be willing to come back. I think I did see that somewhere. And it'll make sense if Scalise has too many issues. And also, too, one of the problems with Jim Jordan is, you know, his past and what went on with the wrestling team. So that's going to become more front facing because if the Speaker of the House is more front facing. So, I mean, if they just keep flipping through people and they can't get anybody, it's going to make Kevin McCarthy's case very strong. So I think there's a good chance for him to be back, especially if he wants to be back, then yeah, definitely.
I think it'll be interesting to see this play out. Of course, we do have that group of Republicans led by Matt Gaetz, who they're not going to see the political blowback from this electorally. That is, of course, we've seen Matt Gaetz' members of his own party going on the news saying that the only reason he came to Congress was for the teenage interns, right, things of that nature, describing the investigations, the ethics, the ongoing, mind you, investigation into his in the ethics investigation into his potential sex crimes, including trafficking of a minor. So, but I think that was a huge reason why Matt Gaetz opposed Kevin McCarthy, was because Kevin McCarthy said that he wouldn't stop the investigation into Matt Gaetz, something he wasn't authorized to do. He didn't have the authority to do. It would have been illegal for him to do, which is obviously not an issue he's going to have with anyone else. But I think it's interesting to think about Kevin McCarthy obviously lying in wait. Of course, he wants the power back. He'd love to have it back. We'll see how that plays out. Because, as I mentioned, Steve Scalise not getting a whole lot of love from his own party. And one of those individuals is Nancy Mace, who's voiced her opposition to Scalise and citing something that would give almost every good person pause before supporting Steve Scalise. Whether or not this is actually why she doesn't support him, I have my doubts, but this is what she had to say.
I plan on voting for Jim Jordan on the floor. I've been very vocal about this over the last couple of days. I personally cannot, in good conscience, vote for someone who attended a white supremacist conference and compared himself to David Duke.
Now, I've already given a lot of the context here, but just to clarify from the Washington Post, Scalise once described himself, according to a local columnist, as, quote, like David Duke without the baggage. He represents the Louisiana congressional district that elected Mr. Duke, the former Ku Klux Klan leader, to the state legislature in 1989. Mr. Scalise apologized in 2014 for having attended a white supremacist gathering more than a decade earlier, saying that he had not known the nature of the group, which, come on, Steve Scalise, yes, the hell you did. Just by virtue of what the name of the group was. It was called the European American Unity and Rights Organization, the acronym EURO. I'm sorry, you didn't read that and immediately know that it was a white supremacist organization? Of course he did. Of course he did. He's a liar. But so is Nancy Mace, who is not opposing Steve Scalise for these reasons. I mean, she supports Donald Trump. She supports Jim Jordan, who turned the other way and turned a blind eye to sex abuse at Ohio State. I mean, she's supported so much abhorrent white nationalist rhetoric within her party. The idea that the buck stops here is absurd. It's absurd. Not that what she's saying isn't true, that he did say these things, but that's not why she's not supporting him.
Yeah, absolutely. And because, you see that if you didn't know that much about Nancy Mace or maybe what the Republican Party's been up to lately, especially, like with the reversal of Roe and Republican politicians being adamant about 6-week bans and what have you, you would think, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I stand with it. But then again, like you said, the support for Trump, the support for Jim Jordan, it's like, well, you look over all of these other terrible things, all of these other ethical problems. But that's the whole Republican Party. I mean, what moral leg do any of them really have to stand on who are a part of that? They say what they want, but even Liz Cheney, like she won't vote for Trump again, but look how much she voted with him. So like, what difference does it really make? Matt Gaetz, who said, obviously he's grandstanding, but he said, if I lose my spot, if I go down, then it will all have been worth it. Like, what is really the tangible objective difference between a Kevin McCarthy speakership or a Jim Jordan or a Steve Scalise or any of them? Like, there's really no difference other than maybe rhetoric they've said, groups that they've been publicly a part of. But other than that, the Republican Party is the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. And that you make an excellent point, because I've been harping on this for a few weeks now. The ideological difference between Matt Gaetz and Kevin McCarthy when he opposed him is non-existent as far as supporting Republican policy goes. Same thing for the difference between Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise. They support the same policies. They're just doing politics differently. Of course, Matt Gaetz's was a naked power grab, essentially, because he believed that Kevin McCarthy didn't, coalesce to him enough. Although he did every opportunity, it wasn't enough for Matt Gaetz. But like reminder, Kevin McCarthy voted not to certify election results. This man is an election denier. All right. He was not some, even-handed, fair balls and strikes type of politician. He was just as anti-democratic as someone like Matt Gaetz is. But when you ascend to that level of politics, when you become the speaker, you have to be mindful of how your actions are going to play in the swing districts, because those are the members of your caucus that are facing tough re-elections, particularly as districts are being redrawn. Districts that were more favorable to Republicans are now becoming more favorable to Democrats after these illegal gerrymandered maps are being struck down by state Supreme Courts and by the Supreme Court itself. Republicans are going to have a tough time in the House in 2024, and that's something that the speaker has to be mindful of. It's not something Matt Gaetz has to be mindful of. It's not something Marjorie Taylor Greene has to be mindful of. They're going to win re-election again. They're in R plus 1,000 districts. They're in districts that would never go blue. So I think that there's a lot of, it's a circus, right? It's a circus going on right now. It's going to be really bad for the Republicans and really good for the rest of us. But I'll let you get the final word in on this, Jackson.
And I think one of the points that you made about it not really making a difference for Matt Gaetz and the Marjorie Taylor Greenes is, if Republicans do take losses, they can just say, look, we need to be more MAGA. We need to be more further right wing on this end of the spectrum. So regardless, they can just campaign off of it. So, because they're really just entertainment. That's kind of all they serve, especially Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Absolutely. Biggest fundraiser for the Republican Party, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Before we get into this next story, I have to read this next comment. And I'm sorry, my screen is a little bit blurry. Okay, Raleigh Jones, there you go. I don't know why this monitor is a little messed up. Sometimes it's hard to read the names. Raleigh Jones, who's getting a Blue Apron gift card, said, based on her misunderstanding of Scarlet Letter, what do you suppose Nancy Mace thinks Moby Dick is about?
Hey, we know. Yeah. Let's not dive into that one. You know what I'm saying? Let's save that for an after hours episode or something.
Right. I don't want to ponder that too much, but you do get a Blue Apron gift card. So thank you for that. Okay. Let's talk about one of the most interesting people in Congress, George Santos. Let's start with this video.
Are you going to offer a resolution to expel George Santos?
Yeah, that's the plan. We're going to, we plan on filing the resolution this afternoon. It's been co-sponsored by all the New York freshmen. We just feel that enough's enough. Obviously, a couple months back, the suggestion was made because there wasn't a 2/3 vote in order to remove him from the House of Representatives to send it to ethics. I know that ethics has been a little busy, but, it's time that we see some results. And after the latest indictment, I think it's clear that he's not fit to serve in the House of Representatives. He's a stain on the institution, and that's why the New York freshmen have come together. He's also a stain on our state.
That was Republican Representative Anthony D'Esposito on his planned resolution to expel George Santos from Congress. Obviously, we talked on the show yesterday about the new indictments against Representative George Santos. And now D'Esposito has been joined by 5 other Republican representatives in this motion. So a little bit more on that from the New York Times. The group of 6 New York freshmen announced plans to swiftly introduce an expulsion resolution to try to capitalize on a spate of new charges against Mr. Santos and a vacuum in House Republican leadership, hoping to whip up enough support to rid themselves and their party of a major political liability ahead of next year's elections. Now, this is an exceptionally hard thing to do. Expelling a member of Congress has a very high threshold. So just a little more details on how it can be done and the likelihood that It will be done, which is little. As the House's most extreme form of punishment, expulsion requires a 2/3 supermajority to pass, a barrier so high that it has only been cleared 5 times in the institution's history, making it far from clear if the move was little more than a messaging exercise by Republicans preparing to defend swing seats next year. And obviously, as we know, George Santos represents a district that is extremely vulnerable, as do a lot of those, as he mentioned, it was the freshman delegation from New York, a lot of them in newly created districts that favor Republicans are facing extremely tough re-elections, and they're mostly representing swing districts, some of the most vulnerable districts in the country. So this feels like a messaging move and an attempt to show that they are not in line in complete lockstep with the Republican Party as they appeal to these voters, who most of whom went for President Joe Biden. Now, this isn't the first time this has been attempted, because House Republicans previously rejected an attempt by Democrats to expel George Santos in May after his initial indictment. Reminder, this is just additional indictments against him. He had been previously indicted in May. But Mr. D'Esposito and his allies said on Wednesday that 2 things had since changed, creating a potentially perilous situation for George. First, Mr. Santos's campaign treasurer pled guilty last week, admitting in court that she conspired with the congressman to report false donations and a fictional $500,000 personal loan to the campaign. Then late Tuesday, authorities added 10 new felony counts against Mr. Santos, dramatically expanding the case against him. Now, Representative Nick LaLota had this to say: "I have a feeling this resolution is going to catch fire. Many people feel like we do." Continues on, Mr. LaLota said that the New York lawmakers had no commitment from party leaders to greenlight an expulsion vote, but the resolution seemed opportunistically timed to coincide with ongoing deliberations over who should replace Mr. McCarthy, who was ousted last week. If the New Yorkers feel strongly enough, they could use their leverage in the vote for Speaker to advance the expulsion push. Now, George Santos, infamous for his many lies, released a lengthy statement, and I will read it in part. Amidst this chaotic mix, more wrenches are being thrown, further complicating matters. It's disheartening to witness my colleagues prioritize their campaigns over the essential work that needs to be done. An expulsion of myself as a member of Congress before being found guilty from a criminal investigation will set a dangerous precedent. This will do nothing other than erase the voices of the electorate. Now, Jackson, I think that if this does come to a vote, Democrats have an interesting position and an interesting role to play, because they initially brought forward the first motion to expel George Santos that the Republicans shot down. But now we're closer to the election. And do you want a more level-headed Republican running in this district to face the Democrat candidate in this district? Or do you want them to have to run against deeply unpopular criminal liar George Santos? In my opinion, from the outside looking in, I think you don't want to expel him on the politics side of things. On the policy side of things, this is a man who doesn't deserve to serve in Congress, as many of our representatives do not, but he absolutely shouldn't be in Congress. But on the politics side of things, Jackson, what is your takeaway of how the Democrats should approach this?
Yeah, I mean, from the politics side of it, I think that they should approach this as well as anything else from the standpoint of what's easiest for us to win. And in a way that's not like a big gamble, because George Santos, even the majority of the constituency in that area want him gone at this point. So, they really would. And also, too, like, for instance, when they got Kevin McCarthy out of that speaker seat, that was very good strategically for the Democrats, because now look at the additional chaos that's going on. Now, on the other side, for the Republicans, they need to go ahead and get rid of him, because it just doesn't help their case in any way. On top of the fact that one of the biggest plights of the Republican Party right now is Trump 2024. And he is a crook and a criminal, and he's trying to beat that brand and that look. So on the other side, that's why Bob Menendez is like, bro, just go ahead and step down. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like you're 40. It's not like you're at the very beginning of your Senate career. You done did your thing, like, step down, because that weakens the Democrats' case against Donald Trump, and he's a crook. So I think you're right. From the political perspective, yeah, just let George Santos stay in there because, I mean, the dude, like I was saying the other day, like he could hold up a cup and be like, this is black. You know what I'm saying? Like this is, and be like, I think it's beige or yellow, or like, no, it's black. Like, so yeah, go ahead and let him stay in there. Let him do his thing.
Obviously, we don't want to we want to be careful. We don't want to too harshly attack 9/11 survivor, Holocaust survivor, whatever, Ukrainian war survivor, George Santos. He's been through a lot.
Right, for real. You know, he got a lot of trauma to deal with. We don't want to add any more, you know? So I always wonder, like, what's really going on in his mind? Like, what does he actually believe? Because his lies are even more egregious than Donald Trump's.
Mm-hmm. He is a fascinating character, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
I am not going to retreat. I'm going to stand on top of this hill with every single one of you, and I know you're by my side as I formally announce my candidacy for the United States Senate.
The person who still won't say she lost her run for Arizona governor is now planning to run for Senate. For now, she's joining Democrat Ruben Gallego in the race, and current Senator Kyrsten Sinema refuses to say whether or not she's going to run for re-election. She has until April of 2024 to formally decide. Now, here's a little bit more from Kari Lake's speech.
If the Democrats keep the Senate, they will pack the Supreme Court. They will make Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico a state. They will legalize infanticide. They'll block President Trump's agenda. And so the stakes have never been higher. And President Trump needs some fighters along with him in D.C. I'm willing to go there. But I need your help to get there. Can I ask a couple favors of you? Okay, I need you to, first of all, turn off the fake news. Okay? Turn them off. If you have subscriptions to their newspapers, cancel the subscriptions, okay? They're anti-American.
Now, she also received an endorsement from the man whose rhetoric she was borrowing from, Donald Trump.
Hello, Arizona. I love Arizona. It's great to be with you tonight and with your next United States Senator, Kari Lake. We have to have a big, strong majority to help me push our America First agenda through, and to push it through really fast. That starts right here tonight by helping Kari Lake win in Arizona, and she will win too. She's an amazing woman, respected by everybody. Kari is one of the toughest fighters in our movement, and I am proud to give her my complete and total endorsement for the United States Senate. She is very special, with people like Kari fighting for Arizona in the Senate.
I don't know why that video looked like AI, but it did. It looked like a fake video of Donald Trump doing a fake endorsement. Now, of course, he says that she'll be the next senator. He's very confident in the fact that she can win, but the Republican Party isn't that confident. They don't share his confidence in this. And Politico reported that the National Republican Senatorial Committee has not ruled out endorsing Lake, according to a person familiar with its planning. Its chair, Senator Steve Daines, met with Lake when she was in D.C. He has said he hopes she will focus on the future and not elections of the past, obviously drawing attention to the fact that she refuses to concede that she lost her gubernatorial election, although she did soften her rhetoric in her campaign launch event. Republicans are still concerned that her harsh language and her vehement attacks against her political opponents and allies is going to weigh her down in this election. From WAPO, while she met with a half dozen Republican senators, many of whom offered campaign assistance or asked to have their photos taken with her, conversations among aides revealed worries about current polling. One Lake advisor described being surprised by the level of freaking out by Washington Republicans. Now, as I mentioned, she softened her rhetoric a little bit. She's attempting to be more mature. She only mentioned one time which is insane to say that that's softening her rhetoric. She only mentioned one time that she believes the election has been stolen, and she didn't attack Democrats as un-American. But before we get in a little bit on what Kyrsten Sinema running as a third-party candidate, obviously we know she switched her affiliation from Democrat to independent recently. And if she chooses to run again as an independent, the role that she might play in this upcoming election. Jackson, the idea that Kari Lake can just give one softer speech and undo the years of insane rhetoric she's been espousing is patently absurd. And the Republicans are right to be afraid.
Yeah, as if she can just snap her fingers like Thanos and undo the digital age that we all are stuck in. But what kills me about Kari Lake or Mike Lumpy Pillow Lindell or anybody like that is how these people destroyed their good, perfectly fine lives, all for some shout outs and a couple cameos with Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And how pathetic that really is. Like Kari Lake does not ever need to run for governor. And if she did, she could have just ran a more normal Republican campaign if she was going to do it. Like she's consciously choosing to do all of this. And now she can't escape it. She had a perfectly fine career. She was doing just fine. Mike Lindell's the same way. But she's not going to win. I'm not concerned about that whatsoever. But for her, getting that shout out from Trump, that I think that's really what drives her. I don't think she really thinks that she's going to become senator. But then again, she's crazy. So maybe she does.
She's definitely heavily motivated by praise from Donald Trump, who has been backing her. We covered a story about a month ago about potentials of Blake Masters entering the race and how Donald Trump called him and told him not to do it. And then how Kari Lake called him and berated him over the phone. But let's skip ahead to graphic 5 and let's talk about what happens if Kyrsten Sinema decides to run, because a lot of the conversation around this before was if she runs, it will hurt Ruben Gallego, the Democratic candidate. But the conversation has now shifted because of recent polling. Private and public polling has suggested that Ms. Sinema is viewed much more favorably by Republican voters than by Democrats. Those surveys indicated that Mr. Gallego would benefit in a three-way race. One of the private polls showed Mr. Gallego leading the race, in part because Ms. Lake appeared to be losing Republican votes to Ms. Sinema. It's from Chuck Coughlin, a longtime Arizona operative, according to people briefed on the survey. Mr. Coughlin declined to comment on specific findings in his poll, but said that while Ms. Sinema would be a significant underdog if she sought re-election, it would also be foolish to count her out. Although I will maybe be a little bit foolish right now and say that Kyrsten Sinema will not be senator again. I think that she will have to reckon with that fact and probably will not run. And then we won't be talking about the spoiler role that she's playing for the Republicans in this race, but it'll be a head-to-head against Kari Lake. But I mean, Jackson, we've been talking on this network about Kyrsten Sinema for a long time, and she has her own. She's driven by her own motivations, right? She's driven by wanting to hold on to power. So maybe I am being a little bit naive in saying that she'll see the writing on the wall and not run again. I mean, this is a woman who loves to be in a position of authority above others.
And I think even more than that, from my point of view, I think she's even more of an opportunist. Mm-hmm. I don't think she really cares about being senator. I don't think she cares about the state in any type of way. Clearly she doesn't. It's not even like I don't think she cares. She clearly doesn't. And due to the actions that she's taken, her voting history, the relationships that she has, she's not going to have any problem finding a much better paying job than being senator. You know what I'm saying? She just is. Senators raise all kinds of money, but she can get a much fatter salary in somebody's corporate office somewhere, which likely for her would just be like, well, I was senator for a couple of terms and now I'm doing something different. I think that's kind of more her than I want to be senator. I don't think she cares that much.
Yeah, I'll just end this story on a comment I saw from Octo Squiddies, who said, Kyrsten can go back to Napa and finish her wine fermenting internship. All right, with something like that. With that, we got to go to a break, but we'll be back with some updates on what's going on with Hunter Biden after this. But now I have time to read this comment from Daniel Velasquez, who's been a member for 26 months, who said, now we need Cheese Bro to be mentioned today, since Chip was also mentioned. The other name I can't read without laughing, someone who is implicated in the indictments of Donald Trump, a former attorney, that every time his name comes up, I just can't get through it. I think I've been mispronouncing it as chess bro in order to not, which is also dumb, but I can't say it without laughing. Cheese bro?
Or that's chess bro. You're one of the two. You're one of the two, Either way, you're insufferable.
Okay, let's turn our attention to the number one issue facing Americans today at home and abroad.
Indeed.
Hunter Biden. Last week in court, Hunter Biden pled not guilty to the following 3 gun charges. First count was false statement in purchase of a firearm. Second count was false statement related to information required to be kept by federal firearm license dealer. And the third count, possession of a firearm by a person who is an unlawful user of or addicted to a controlled substance. And all 3 of those stem from the same thing: signing a document saying that he is not addicted to a controlled substance, and making a statement attesting to that while purchasing the gun. So all 3 of those are based on essentially the same statement. Now, as of yesterday, the initial plea bargain he made is officially completely dead, following the U.S. District Judge in the case, Maryellen Noriega, formally removing the previous gun charge that was a part of the collapsed plea deal. Now, the deadline for pretrial motions in the case is November 3rd, and no future hearings have been scheduled. As of right now, special counsel David Weiss has yet to file new charges related to unpaid taxes, which Hunter Biden had previously been set to plead guilty to as a part of the plea deal. But as I mentioned, that's pretty much up in the air. Plea deal's off. But we are expecting to see the indictments on those tax charges. We've talked about this a lot on TYT. He didn't pay his taxes, and then he was instructed by the IRS to do so, and he paid all of them. I fully concur with the statements that Hunter Biden's attorney has made, that this is largely a political prosecution in an attempt to damage Joe Biden's reputation moving into the election, because people don't get jail time for this. It never happens. I'm sorry. People do not get jail time for these types of charges. And Hunter Biden is currently staring down the barrel of jail time. Not saying he didn't break the law. He absolutely did. He absolutely broke the law. But the treatment of him is distinctly different than the treatment of other people with the same exact charges. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of speculation about how this might affect the 2024 election. And it's obvious that Trump, or whoever's running against Biden in the general election, Trump, will milk this to discredit Joe Biden. Another issue is how it may, affect Joe Biden as a candidate's attention, especially given he's still sitting president with all of those responsibilities in mind. Now, this is a major concern of Biden aides, who note that Joe didn't run in 2016 because of the death of his son, Beau, when he had this to say: "No man or woman should announce for president of the United States unless they can look the public in the eye and say, I promise you, I am giving 100% of my attention and dedication to this effort." And when asked by MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle how Hunter's charges would affect him, he said, "It impacts my presidency by making me feel proud of him." Now, inside sources are painting a slightly different picture than the one Joe Biden has been publicly. From NBC News, Biden aide has even since lamented aloud that he might be dead before his son's case would be resolved, according to another source close to the Bidens. Oof, that isn't something you want to get out to the press. The president and first lady are even more reluctant to hear about any of the political implications from close aides, and are resigned to the fact that Hunter's legal problems will likely worsen in the months ahead, this person said. Now, a source close to the Biden said that Hunter is now similarly steeling his spine for both the legal and political sparring to come. And Jackson, we've talked about the prevalence of drug use and the impact that this might have on the feelings of the American public. I think that the Republicans are overplaying their hand, that they fail to understand how close addiction has hit home to many Americans, and how this has, by and large, painted Joe Biden as a very loving father. And juxtaposed to Donald Trump, who obviously doesn't give a damn about his children. I think that they are overestimating the impact this will have on the opinion of the electorate, However, it's obviously heavily plaguing Joe Biden personally.
Yeah, I think it's, hitting Joe Biden personally. How could it not? It's his son. But at the same time, I don't think, as you pointed out, it would overshadow the fact that Donald Trump has almost 100 felony charges. He's in the process of losing his ability to legally make money. And he's spiraling out of control every single day. Mm-hmm. And as you pointed out, too, I mean, what are the big gripes against Hunter Biden, who, mind you, is not in office of any kind? He's not in Congress. He's not in the White House administration. None of that. So it's really to no consequence. But what are their biggest gripes? As you pointed out, he was hooked on drugs, like a lot of people are, for many different reasons, including legal prescription drugs, which was part of Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. We're going to stop these pharmaceutical companies from getting away with murder. So you could just flip that on its head right there. Mm-hmm. And then what? He didn't pay his taxes. Well, as you pointed out, he ended up paying his taxes. Many Americans get a knock on the door by the IRS like, hey, you owe us $10,000, but they'd rather get a little bit of it than none of it. And I mean, who's Donald Trump or any of the Trumps to talk about? I mean, the tax fraud is how they made their money. So I think just with halfway decent political strategy, you can just be like, Trump's much worse. Trump's much worse. Look, Hunter Biden's a human being and he went through some stuff. So as you pointed out, they're definitely overplaying their hand, because who cares? Like, nobody cares.
Right. I mean, I feel the Republicans strongly believe that this will be a rallying cry to their base. Of course, most reasonable people will say, well, Hunter Biden isn't running for anything. If you can prove that this has some sort of implication on Joe Biden, which the Republicans are desperately trying to do in their, impeachment inquiry.
He can't even raise his son right, type of thing. You know what I'm saying? I guess that's what it is,
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's interesting for sure. We'll see where this goes. Obviously, the plea deal is off, which seems like blatant politicking on behalf of the judge involved, as well as the prosecutors. Most people don't go to jail for these types of charges. I can't imagine if he was anyone else that they wouldn't have accepted the plea agreement. And we're still awaiting for these tax charges to come down as the investigation happens. But let's take a minute to talk about how a special counsel was appointed to investigate this, which is exactly what the Republicans asked for. In fact, the exact special investigator they asked for was the one appointed to investigate this matter. They still complained about it. Ted Cruz still went on TV and said, actually, that man is an unfair Democrat and we don't want him investigating, despite the fact that it was the exact person, the exact individual, David Weiss, that Ted Cruz is on camera calling for to be the special counsel in the first place. So no matter what happens in this case, Republicans are going to use it as a way to attack Biden. No matter if they get everything they ever wanted, it's still somehow going to be used as an attack on Joe Biden.
Well, just so everyone knows, there's a couple of candidates running against Ted Cruz. And there's also a political action committee called the Lose Cruz PAC. In other words, most people don't like Ted Cruz, which is so interesting about him. He's like a strong pillar of a vote and he pushes forth the Republican agenda shamelessly, but everybody despises him. I mean, the dude was just on TV saying like, oh, Democrats don't want you to drink beer. Oh, and then he drunk a beer like a big tough guy because, Democrats don't want capitalism. And then he was just saying like, there's a plot for Michelle Obama. She's going to end up running. So now I'm just thinking about Ted Cruz, and this is, I guess it's because we have to talk about this today, but now I'm just thinking about how much I despise him. I don't have anything else to say.
I love the video that you're talking about. And if anyone watching hasn't seen it yet, go check it out. It is one of the most awkward videos I've ever seen. Ted Cruz is standing in what is a barn at a ranch, and he's surrounded by men all wearing the same sort of outfit behind him. And he says something about how Democrats don't want you to drink beer. And then they all twist off the caps of their beer and take a swig at the same time and look at the TV, look at the camera.
Super satisfied, right? They look super satisfied, like someone's really stopping them from drinking alcohol. But
It is just some hilarious political stunt that they did on Fox News that had nothing to do with the ranchers he was supposedly there to talk to. Okay, but that being said, that's all the time we have for the first hour, but stick around because we have a lot of good stories coming up in the aftermath. Hold on to your butts.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.